Hello everybody, and welcome to this video on the House Rules series for Axis&Allies 1914. So we've got another house rule here, and today's all about Russia. Now, if you didn't know, today marks the 100th anniversary of the October Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. So that's what we're talking about today. So this is a house rule for the Russian Revolution / Civil War rules. So essentially, what I have here is a setup of how the game might look by round 4. Now the optional Russian Revolution rules in the original out-of-box game, those are still the same. They are still that at the end of Russia's turn on round 4, if those certain conditions are met, I believe is if the Central Powers control 3 territories adjacent to Moscow and 1 additional territory, so that's what we have here, then the Russian Revolution will kick off at the end of Russia's turn. So that has not changed. What has changed is what happens afterwards. Now normally Russia would just be out of the game, but no, that's not what's going to happen here. So what you're going to do is at the end, immediately after Russia's mobilized new units phase, so they'll put down their units. So immediately after that, they're not going to do their collect income. You're going to start the Russian Revolution. Now, and once you finish doing the Russian Revolution, you can move on to Germany's turn. So the Russian Revolution, there's a few steps for doing it because it sets up all the elements you need. It's a little complicated, but I feel like it was the simplest way to do it. So essentially, you're going to start by taking all Russian and other allied forces out of Karelia, Moscow, and Kazakhstan, because those are going to be Soviet territories. So how you do that is you get to retreat them 1 space to any adjacent territory that's controlled or contested by Russia. You can also move them onto transports, friendly transports. So for example, here in Moscow, we can't move anywhere here. We can go to Tatarstan. So we're going to move them to Tatarstan. And in Karelia, we can only move them. We can't move them here or to Moscow. That's going to be Soviet. We could move them to Finland, or we can move them onto this friendly transport, a British transport. And we're going to go ahead and do that. And that is it. These Russian units out over here, they don't need to be moved. If we had any other units anywhere else, they wouldn't have to be moved either. So the next step is to remove any Central Powers units from the same territories. We'd have to remove, from those same territories. So example, we have right here in Karelia. We're going to have to move him back here to Livonia. Alright, and that seems to fix that up. Okay, and then the next step was we introduce the Soviet power. Now, we're going to have to assign one of the Central Powers players or a new player to play as the Soviets. So essentially the Soviets are essentially an associated power of the Central Powers. I'll talk more about that later. So what I would use is just grab some Soviet units from a different edition of Axis&Allies, one of the World War II versions. That's what I'm using here. And just start putting them on the board. So start with control markers. So we get 1 in Karelia, 1 in Moscow, and then 1 in Kazakhstan. And then the unit setup is as follows: 3 infantry in Moscow. Now we use the red Central Powers chips for simplicity. And then, so that's the World War II unit. 3 in Karelia, 3 infantry there. An artillery in each. 1 artillery each. And then 2 infantry in Kazakhstan. And now that's the Soviet power. So now the Soviets are in the game. And now, oh, and we also have one sea unit, which is one cruiser, which goes in Sea Zone 12, that represents the Aurora and the other rebelling sailors at the time. So now that that's done, you put a Soviet control marker on the national production chart. They're starting off with 9 IPCs, so you take your little roundel and you put it on there. And then they would also start with the 9 IPCs, so you already automatically give it to their bank, to the player. And then now, and also Russia, Imperial Russia, I should say, is going to keep any leftover IPCs they had in their treasury. So now we have a new faction, and now we have the Russian Civil War going on. So essentially, it's a proxy conflict between, for simplicity and for the sake of this game, is a proxy conflict between the red Bolshevik Soviet forces being supported by the Central Powers and the white nationalist imperial forces supported by the Allies. So automatically the Soviets are at war with the Allies once they're in the game. So their goal is to take all of Russia and spread their influence. Now it's a new power, and it conducts its turn just like any other power the Soviets do. Their turn is at the very end of the game, so they go after the United States and before Austria. So that's when their turn takes place. And their capital is Moscow, obviously. And so they use the red ships. Now, the only special rules regarding the Soviets, now I said they're an associated power of the Central Powers, so they do have certain limitations on their movement. Now, per the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which made peace between the Soviet Russian government and the Central Powers, it divides Russia into 2 spheres. I'm calling them Inner and Outer Russia. So, Inner Russia is all the territories the Soviets are allowed to move into. And Outer Russia are the ones that they gave up to the Central Powers, so they cannot go into these territories. So they basically cannot cross, the Central Powers and Soviets cannot cross their line of division and go into each other's areas. So, let me explain. Outer Russia is all the territories the Central Powers can move into and the Soviets cannot move into. So that's Finland, Livonia, Belarus, Poland, Ukraine, and Sevastopol. And so the Soviets cannot move into any of those territories. And in addition, they have to respect the neutrality of Persia and Afghanistan. So they can't move into those territories either. And additionally, the Soviets can never move into any territory that is contested or currently controlled or originally controlled by any of the Central Powers. So they could never move into Mesopotamia because that was an original Ottoman territory. They could never move into, let's say the Germans take Sweden, then they could not move into there because the Germans are there. Or if the Germans are contesting Sweden, then they could not move in there either. Now, so that's the end of their limitations. And you notice that they do have a navy, so they are allowed to move by sea. The limitation with that is that they can't end their turn in any sea zone that has Central Powers sea units, but they can move through them. So if Germany had boats here, they can move their cruiser through there. And of course, they would be subject, since they're at war with the Allies, they'd be subject to sea mines from the Allies and Allied naval ships. Now, I should mention that the Soviets are allowed to build any kind of unit that any other power can, so they can build tanks, planes, transports, battleships if they want. If they do build a transport, I should mention that yes, you are allowed to move it out, and you could land in England if you wanted to, so that's totally allowed. But yeah, that's the Soviets and their limitations. And now I should mention since the Soviets took Moscow, that does not count as a victory city for the Central Powers. Additionally, if the Allies take Moscow back, and then Russia would be back in the game, and Russia would have the capital back, and that still would not count as a victory city for the Allies either. Now, since the Soviets and the Allies are at war, the Imperials, or the Imperial Russians and the Allies, they're all at war with each other. So the Imperial units could attack Soviets, and the Soviets would attack them back. And now I should mention that the Allies and the Imperial Russians they don't have to follow the lines of division of Brest-Litovsk that the Central Powers and Soviets do. The Soviet units could move back and forth, and the Allied units could move back and forth freely. Now, so once the Allies take back Moscow, if they do, then Russia would be back in the game. And I should also note that if Russia comes back into the game and is losing the game again there's no second Russian Revolution. The conditions, if they're met again, then they wouldn't happen again. Any Soviet units remaining on the board after Moscow is taken would still remain in the game. They would still follow the same limitation rules, but they would still be in the game just like any other defeated power that has lost their capital. And I believe that is about it. Russia would collect any unspent IPCs if they take Moscow from the Soviets. And yes, I believe that is it. Yeah, so I guess I'll just show some example. So these two ships, since this is a Russian ship, they would be contested and they would have to attack each other on their next turn. So Soviets' next turn, they would have to fight that ship. If that were the case, over here, the British are allowed to move into Afghanistan and take that. And they could move into here and start attacking the Soviets that way, since they are at war. But even if the British took Afghanistan and defeat the British, and the British are defeated, the Soviets still can't move into Afghanistan, because they have to respect that part of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And yeah, Russian units would still remain in the game, even if they're outside of Russia, like the ones here in Mesopotamia. That's about it. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this house rule, and you guys can have fun with it. You guys can celebrate the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. So feel free to like and subscribe to the channel for more awesome videos like this. The document that outlines these rules should be in the description. You'll find a link to that. And yeah, look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a good day. Bye.